Back with us now, Congressman Jan Meuser from House Small Business, along with author and former investment banker Carol Roth. Okay, both of you, I want you to sit tight. We're going to listen to the president's first sit-down interview in 7 months. You're going to see a bunch of gaffes and mistakes here. Watch this.
Mr. President, as you know, last Tuesday, the annual inflation rate came in at 8.3%. The stock market nosedived. People are shocked by their grocery bills. What can you do better and faster?
Well, first of all, let's put this in perspective. Inflation rate month to month was just an inch, hardly at all.
You're not arguing that 8.3 is good news.
No, I'm not saying it is good news, but it was 8.2 or 8.2 before. I mean, it's not. Maybe I can make it sound like all of a sudden, my God, it went to 8.2%. It's
the highest inflation rate, Mr. President, in 40 years.
I got that. But guess what we are?
Sir, are you committed to running again?
It's much too early to make that kind of decision. I'm a great respecter of fate. And so what I'm doing is I'm doing my job.
Is the pandemic over?
The pandemic is over. We still have a problem with COVID.
Okay, Congressman, your reaction. Let's take on inflation. Grocery prices are up the fastest since 1979. Numerous U.S. cities, more of them, seeing double-digit inflation. The Cleveland Fed is seeing 9.2 inflation, the highest since 1983.
Yeah, Liz, this is like if a doctor telling you that you have 103.5 degree temperature, but it's okay because that's what it was last month. You're still very sick. And this president and the Biden Democrats in the House are still doing the things that got us here. They want to spend more. They want to tax more. They want to regulate. They want to continue to assault our domestic energy. All right? They're driving us further into recession and driving up inflation. As a matter of fact, they're battling the Fed right now with the type of actions they're taking. The Fed's raising interest rates and pulling way back on their balance sheet, and yet the spending counters that.
So, Carol, how do you measure, mathematically, how is inflation up an inch?
I think the congressman, had it correct. It's kind of like, oh, well, I gained 20 pounds, but now I only gained a pound, and so my weight is under control. It is just this complete insanity, and it does seem like they're operating on a different memo, as the congressman pointed out. They're continuing to do the things that one would do if you didn't have inflation. They're not doing anything to help the supply side. They are continuing to spend, and at the same time, the Federal Reserve got a completely different memo. They got the memo that we have massive inflation that requires massive intervention on their part. So certainly the two sides are not talking to each other and working in complete opposite direction. And unfortunately, the Americans are paying the price for that.
And you see the Atlanta Fed tracker, the GDP tracker, downgraded it to 0.5% growth for the third quarter, downgraded from, I think, 2.6%, Congressman. So is this why the president has not had a sit-down in 7 months? Is this why his team keeps him out of the media? Because he gets visibly angry and frustrated and repeatedly makes mistakes like saying the pandemic is over? He just used it as a legal basis for his $1 trillion student loan bailout.
Yeah, they must be telling him things and he actually believes it. Like, for instance, they cut the deficit by $500 billion and how wonderful that's going to be, which last year they spent $3 trillion. This year they only overspent $2.5 trillion. And telling us that COVID is over, I wish he'd inform his Secretary of Education, and as well in the recent CR, the continued resolution, he's got $22 billion in there to fight COVID. So if that's the case, I guess we can remove that $22 billion as well.
Yeah, to the congressman's point, Carol, if it's over, then should the president give up his vaccine mandate for federal workers? He's still fighting that in court. Should he give up his emergency powers? Should he rehire all those soldiers, cops, and firemen, and all those health workers fired for over the vax mandate, Carol?
Yes, yes, and yes, Liz. I mean, what a weird way to announce that the pandemic is over, that instead of, repealing these mandates and talking to people about getting them back into work after separating them unfairly from their jobs, he's just going to kind of like let this slip on 60 Minutes. I mean, it is a complete embarrassment. The reality is many of us decided the pandemic was done long ago. That wonderful judge who ended the mask mandates on planes basically put a real end to it. But now it's time, like you said, to get rid of the EUAs, to get rid of these ridiculous mandates and let people go back to work and take away that power that unfortunately the federal government and local governments don't want to give up.
And you know what's striking, Congressman? Your reaction to the president saying he's undecided if he's going to run again in 2024. It's rare for an incumbent president to hold control of the House at a midterm. Only Bill Clinton did it in 1998 and George W. after 9/11. So what was your thought when you heard him say he's undecided about running again?
Well, he's beginning to agree with nearly 70% of America, right, who's very dissatisfied with his performance on every issue from Afghanistan through the terrible crisis at our border, which is a shameless, unmitigated disaster. So, he's probably figuring that one out for himself, that maybe he's not doing too good of a job.
Carol, to what the congressman is saying, let's show the viewer the number of companies doing layoffs and hiring freezes. Carol, the number of companies doing this continues to grow. Under this president, we've seen $5 trillion in new deficits. That's about the size of Germany. Shutting down U.S. oil and gas, at least hundreds of billions of dollars in new regulations, like 40 times versus the prior administration. We went from steady, consistent growth of 2.5% a year, stock market gains, low inflation averaging around 2%. We had gas down, and now we see the direct opposite, Carol. Your final word.
Yeah, they're continuing to find a way to spin this. They want to say we shut down the economy, we turned it back on, we have a record job creation. Unfortunately, the economic realities are going to continue to come home to roost based on the fiscal irresponsibility of this administration. And at some point, they're not going to be able to say anything else.
Okay, Congressman Meuser and Carol Roth, thanks for joining us tonight.